Awesome to welcome Denver Nuggets assistant coach Ryan Saunders to the basketball podcast. Ryan Saunders is assistant coach for the Denver Nuggets and former head coach for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Ryan has also served as assistant coach with the Washington Wizards and Minnesota Timberwolves. He's the son of longtime NBA coach Flip Saunders. He played basketball at the University of Minnesota. In 2019, Saunders was promoted to interim head coach of the Timberwolves and became the youngest head coach in the NBA for the 2018-19 season. In June 2022, the Denver Nuggets hired Saunders as an assistant coach under Michael Malone, where this past season he became an NBA champion. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Glad to be here.
Awesome to have you here, and magical year, Coach. Congrats on the championship. Talk to us about what made this team special in terms of how they played and how they came together.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things made them special. Really, you can start with some individual players and Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and just the way the whole group was, what they were comprised of as a team. They all complemented each other in an unbelievable way. I've really never been a part of, this is my 13th year in the NBA, and I've never been a part of a locker room where everybody was overly willing to give up something for them of themselves for the greater good of the team. And it was just really special to be a part of and to be able to not just witness that, but really feel it on a daily basis. And it's something that no one can ever take away from champion. And I'm super thankful that I was able to be a part of that group this last year.
It's pretty cool, no doubt. And you talk to us a little bit. What are some visible signs of people sacrificing for others? Obviously, the old adage, you give, when you give, you receive.
Yeah.
What are some actual visible signs of that you see within a locker room like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hear a lot of things in sports. You hear people talk about, we want to be more about actions over words, or we want to be more about the doing than the saying. And sometimes those things don't even need to be said on a championship team. They're just done. And I think a great example of that is a guy like Aaron Gordon, who the level that he has come into the league with of skill and what he has been able to do. He really just gives himself up for the group and does things that others maybe can do, but also allows others to focus more on maybe it's the scoring load, or maybe it's just specifically defending things of that nature. He was just really kind of the heart and soul of our team, and he was just a great example of a living example every day of just approaching the game, approaching the work with a professional mindset to help the team.
So you've been in the NBA a long time and been around the game even longer with your dad and everything. So you've been around a lot of two-player type of actions that have been pretty beautiful and pretty special. So if you talk about Murray and Jokic and you talk about all those other players you've been around like that have had that synergy, what are some things that stand out in terms of those unseen hours for them to develop that synergy?
Yeah, well, I mean, not just the individual talent, but I think it's the fact that guys like that, when they are unbelievably talented, they don't cheat getting from point A to point Z by just trying to skip steps. And I use that I phrase it in that sense of, Jamal does a great job. He doesn't get enough credit for being a guy that the way he sets his defender up. Nikola, he's so great at angles. He's so great at his timing. I mean, he's such an unbelievable passer. His timing of how he can hand the ball off and create space, not just for his teammate, but he's able to roll in a way that the defender has to make a choice. Are you going to guard a guy like Jamal Murray, or are you going to guard a guy like Nikola Jokic? And I've always been a big fan of getting your best, it sounds simple, but getting your best two players on a clear side of the floor and letting them work. And it was fun to watch up close, as that's something this Denver Nugget team has been doing for so long. Coach Malone, David Adelman, these guys who have been here for a long time. It's just been a great synergy. And I think that's something that is something that should be looked at as a real positive in the NBA. The fact that not a lot of teams have that so much, is a lot of turnover. This team has had great success by just really sticking with a plan, sticking to it, and just focusing on getting better on a daily basis. So when it comes to a two-man game, I mean, I've seen some really good ones, but seeing what those two were able to do in the NBA Finals was remarkable. And to see it up close you can't help but just smile a little bit, because as much as coaches, you want to think you have a huge impact on the game, on the outcome of the game. When you have guys like that, it makes your life a lot easier.
Absolutely. We'd all love that and make all of our jobs easier. And talk to us a little bit. How much of that is player led versus coach led in terms of identifying some of those angles and working on some of those synergies? At this point in their career, obviously very experienced players.
Yeah.
Are you cueing things to bring to their attention, or is it more them cueing the things to each other?
Coach and David Alman, who does a lot with our offense, they always put forth great plans on a daily basis, by whether it's showing clips. For those who might not know, the NBA, the season does get very long, and the days they really just keep kind of piling up, and you got to be smart with what you do. You want to teach, you want to continue to improve, but you also understand that availability is the greatest attribute you can have. And so with that comes a lot of film study, comes a lot of walkthroughs. We do a good amount of those types of things through the playoffs. And so with coaches, yeah, we're always trying to help find an edge with these guys, help give them any type of edge they can have. But just in terms of their intelligence, it's Nikola, the things that he sees, it's really incredible. The passes, everybody sees the passes he makes on highlight reels, but those are also the way he can make those passes is by how he sets his defender up maybe 2 or 3 plays prior. And where he might be setting up a defender from the corner prior by looking a guy off or making a pass, 3 straight times just to try to set up a back cut on the 4th time. So I'd say it's a combination of both. And that's one of the beauties, I think, of a championship level team is that everybody just being willing to work together. And this group had that this last year.
Well, and to highlight something, I mean, you mentioned obviously Coach Malone and Adelman and what they do, and you're running the defense. And I saw you the day before a game basically put in a dribble handoff type of plan for defending dribble handoffs. And I think what's surprising to people from the outside, if they don't know, is how quickly players can pick that up.
Oh, yeah.
Like you taught it, and then they were doing it the next game. And I don't know if it was a change or whatever. I can't remember the exact plan, but it's impressive, isn't it, how quickly they can get it?
Oh, it really is. And every team is different. Every season takes on a life of its own, and every team takes on a personality of its own. We were very fortunate to have a group of guys on that team who were not just intelligent basketball players, but were able to receive information and then implement the information and maybe a change that we were looking to make on the fly, which made our life easier, not easy, but easier. But I've been a part of some young teams. I was a part of some developing teams in Washington, D.C. and in Minnesota. And hey, it might not be as quick, but you're trying to still get to the answer, the root of the problem. It just might not take as long with a more veteran team, which we had. So our guys did a great job of really just being able to implement these game plans throughout that long playoff run.
I think you're speaking to a lot of challenges coaches have in terms of those 1 or 2 players that don't get it as quickly. So talk to us with your experience. What are some ways to be able to get them extra help to be able to get them to understand it?
Yeah, I'm always somebody, whenever I get to talk to someone like you who's trying to grow the game or just talk about the game, I always like to make it clear I don't have all the answers, so I'm still trying to search for that answer too. And yeah, I'd like to think that none of us do, but we're all trying to get better with that. But something that I do feel has helped me maybe reach some of those guys is really one, trying to find the way they learn, and whether that be, do they learn by seeing it through just a video clip? Do they learn from seeing it? Can they read a diagram? Is that better for them? Physically walking them through a diagram, or are they the type of player that needs to be on the court and have that muscle memory? I think everybody's different, and that's our challenge as coaches. And that's why I think the summers are so important to try to get around players, to try to learn some of those things, especially when you have a new group of guys and you want to try to learn how they learn, but then you also need to try to learn how they can be coached. Some guys are used to maybe tougher coaching. Some guys maybe need you to put an arm around their shoulder. And that's a challenge too, because it should always come back to the player. I think we're all just trying to help the player. In the end, we're all going to help each other, but we really need to take the time, and there's resources out there for it. Something that has helped me a lot through COVID. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Eric Thomas, who is a speaker. He does a lot of different types of kind of workshops on what type of leader are you, what's your communication style. I actually was able to have our players, when I was the coach in Minnesota, take these kind of little tests to find out what their communication style was, which helped me. So trying to find any type of edge you can And you can find not just to try to help you win games, but more so try to help you get through to an individual. And it's not always going to work. So I guess I think as coaches, we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace, something I continue to try to work on when maybe it doesn't work. But with that, though, we can look at it as a failure, or we can look at it as something like, hey, it didn't work for us this time. What didn't work? The fact that we weren't able to get a breakthrough to try to avoid this for the next time we encounter a player like this, I think is really important.
Yeah, great stuff. And we'll all be searching Dr. Eric Thomas now. That's great.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about moving from assistant to head coach, but not probably enough about moving from head to assistant coach.
Mhm.
Can you share some of the insights into what made you successful making this transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think success can be defined in a lot of different ways, and I think it should be defined in a different way for everybody. And simply my goal, I've known Coach Malone for a long time, and he's been a good friend. And when he presented me with this opportunity, I thought it was a perfect fit, not just to work with somebody I was close with, but I felt very fortunate to have an opportunity to work with this type of team, this type of organization. And going from being a head coach to an assistant, I think you kind of learn. I was a head coach in Minnesota for nearly 3 years, and you kind of learn what you would want in an assistant your next time around, if there is a next time around, and you try to be that. And I think the biggest thing I would say is trying to find things that can be taken off the head coach's plate. So whatever you can do to be somebody to not just not cause problems, but also put out maybe fires before they get to a head coach, because a head coach, whether it be college, NBA, high school, whatever level you're at, I've heard people say, hey, I'm just a high school coach. I know you've been an NBA head coach. And I always stop them with that, because it doesn't matter. Whatever level you're at in terms of being a coach, you're going to have a heavy burden on your shoulders. And if we have assistants that can help take some of that load off, we're all going to be better for it. And I think that's really important. So my main goal was really just come in and try to do whatever I could to help Coach Malone and help the organization. I mean, I think that everybody should look at it that way. It might be tough sometimes for folks. I know everybody wants to work their way up in a lot of ways, but I've always been a believer, and kind of learned that from my dad, is if you just take care of what you're doing in that moment, everything else is going to take care of itself, whatever that means, whatever that looks like for your future. And once again, I know I've said it a number of times, I use the word fortunate a lot, because working in the NBA, I feel very fortunate to be working in the NBA, but also to be working in an organization like this too. And I think it's when you continue to say that you feel fortunate, you feel it even more, and you feel even more in the trenches in those moments. So that's something I try to say over and over on a daily basis.
Gratitude's a great thing. That's awesome.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I know the staff is tremendous staff you're a part of, and a very collaborative staff. So maybe give
yeah.
some insights, like before you take something, say to Coach Malone, is it a collaboration? Like you have an idea, do you run it through your other, colleagues first before it goes to Coach Malone?
Yeah, but it's hard to describe, because it's such a you said it, and you've been around our group a little bit. It is such a collaborative group, and I mean, when I say there's no ego on the staff, I mean, really, it's everybody. I haven't seen one person ever think that this should be brought to. I should bring this to the decision maker just because it was my idea. It's all, hey, whatever's going to help this team. And so there's plenty of times where we bounce ideas off each other. Our offices were tight quarters in the ball arena, so we bounce ideas off each other. But there's no set protocol in terms of where it's, hey, just because so and so might be running the offense and so might be running the defense, everything should go through them. But it's all as a group. And decisions, that's something that Coach Malone, he does an unbelievable job of managing a staff and letting everybody have a voice and everybody feel like their voice is heard, but then also being able to be somebody that makes a solid decision. So we're all on the same page going out of that room. So there's healthy dialogue, healthy discussion. And it's just been a really enjoyable experience to have those different types of ideas, because we got a lot of guys. I mean, Popeye Jones played in the NBA, Ryan Bowen played in the NBA. I mentioned David Ellman. Charles Klask is unbelievably smart with how he uses an analytical mind in approaching the game. John Beckett has been doing player development. We got a lot of guys that have coached overseas or came from overseas. So just the diversity of thought is really, really special in Denver.
Yeah, it must be fun to be a part of that. And yeah, I'm curious, from the organization or from Coach Malone, we mentioned you focused on the defense, and clearly you can focus on anything, but what was the decision to be able to get you involved more on the defensive side?
I mean, it's kind of just what was open. And sometimes it just works out that way. And I think coach has always been great about when I was the coach in Minnesota, he and I would talk also in that time, as it was my first head coaching job. But and I do remember him always bringing up, I don't like to look at coaches as just guys who specialize in one thing, offense, defense, whatever it may be. We're basketball coaches, and whatever the job calls us to do, we're willing to do that. And I think being sons of coaches as well, we understand that. And whatever the job calls for, if it's going to help the group, let's do it. That's kind of the mindset, I guess.
How fun, different eras, but you both grew up in the game and
Oh
around the
yeah.
game in that way. That's so cool. That's pretty cool to be able to share those stories, no doubt. And yeah, you kind of referenced it a little bit. So I'm just curious, like, I'm sure you've given thought to it. You get another head coaching opportunity. For you, what looks different and what looks the same for you?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that I don't really think about much, in the sense of I've always, I mentioned it earlier, my father always talked about being a believer in, hey, wherever you're planted, you got to continue to try to grow and bloom there, and whatever that looks like. And so I'm super happy here working with coach and working with this group, and just everything we're doing. But you also, as coaches, we're always trying to get better. So with that, you gotta, I guess, look at your past and look at things that maybe worked, or look at things that maybe didn't work, and say, there have been moments this year where I tell myself, hey, I probably would do this different had I known this when I was in Minnesota a couple of years prior, or I was on the right track with this, I guess, whether it be just something in terms of culturally trying to implement as a offensively, defensively, whatever that may be. But I think that the biggest thing for me, I guess, moving forward would be trying to make sure you don't try to micromanage every little thing. And I think that a lot of times coaches, might try to do that within their first job, but you also need to know, hey, you can pass things off to others, because there's a lot of talented individuals in that building. And I think you kind of learn what can maybe be taken off your plate, and what you maybe need to focus on the bigger picture things, but then also focus on the relationship aspect of it all too with players. So I think you're always checking boxes. You're always saying, hey, I could do this better. I was on the right track with this. But in the end, I think it's always going to come back to, hey, how can we help these players? And how can we build a better relationship with these players? And I have learned some of those things within this last year, because coaches, he's been around these guys for so long, this continuity, he's able to coach them hard, coach them in a way with love. And then at the end of the day, always get through to them too, because they know he cares. And so you continue to try to pick up on those things, and we're always learning as coaches.
Absolutely. And maybe let's focus a little bit on some of the defensive stuff, since you spent so much time, and obviously Denver's defense was well talked about this year and a key to your success. So maybe first, what does accountability on defense look like and sound like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, for our group, it always starts out with our communication. We talk about accountability. You want to be accountable in your commands. And I say that we always speak early, loud, continuous. Whatever command you're calling, whether it's in the ball screen, whether it's in catch and shoot action, or it's something off the ball, trying to defend penetration, and then we're getting into rotations. We want you to say these commands 3 times, early, loud, continuous. And I'm sure you hear that a lot through different programs, and whether it be college, whether it be NBA. But for us, it really is a staple, just because we do want to talk early. Teams where people probably saw in that Miami series, the way that team was slipping out of ball screens, took a little while to get used to with the smalls. They have great shooters there. So the way they were sometimes setting, the way they were sometimes just giving you a little tap, and the way sometimes they weren't even coming close, they were just slipping out of it. We need to figure out our communication and strengthen our communication even into June, and something that we have been working on through the whole year. So in terms of accountability, that was big for us. And then we talk a lot about accountability of, hey, we want to defend with the idea of, you don't have help, but understanding that you do have help, if that makes sense. So if we can defend it at the point of attack, that helps the rest of our defense. We're not getting the rotations. We're not having to scramble. We're not having to be at a disadvantage at the rim with a small trying to box out a big, or a big having to guard a dynamic small on the perimeter. So we want to contain at the point of attack. And that just means everybody doing their job. And we had guys that just really did a great job of that all season long. And through the year, the season can kind of be broken down a lot of times into quarters or big chunks. And for part of the year, we defended at a really, really high level. Part of the year, we maybe didn't defend at a high level, but fortunate for us at the end of the year, when we really needed it, it came through. And it's just a big credit to the players with this group.
So communication, you brought that up. I mean, I know at your level, one of the hardest things to be able to deal with, and I'm assuming you have a plan for it, but it is this decision between, you mentioned the slip, the ghost, the set, the touch.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's all these variations of someone setting a screen now, especially on the ball. So is there a preferred mechanism that you can give us insights in to help us understand how we get our players to communicate some of those differences?
Yeah, and I think that the great thing about basketball is I don't know if there's a right answer. I just know that there is probably a right answer for your team. Fortunate for us with our veteran group of guys, we had an opportunity to communicate whether we were switching the slip out or the ball screen, or if we were going to be square with the ball screen or slip out. But we also had the ability to go into a game and say, hey, no matter what it was, a ball screen or a slip out, we were just going to switch it, just to eliminate any type of indecision. And that can be based on your environment too. Hey, maybe you're playing in Miami and it's a loud environment where your verbal communication, we like to talk a lot about nonverbal communication as well, using pointing your switches, pointing if it's a late switch, any of those situations. But maybe you adapt to your environment and you say, hey, just to eliminate any type of gray area, this action, not necessarily the set, we talk more about actions. This action, all right, we're just going to defend it, or we're just switching everything here. So I guess the right answer is that we were able to adapt a little bit to it. And I think that that's something that teams you're going to find, whether it be a young team, maybe you just need one set way of defending something, or maybe it's more of a veteran team. You have a lot of 4-year starters or fifth year seniors that can kind of handle more on a game-to-game basis, and then you find your answer there.
So we mentioned the ball screen, defending that. What is one of the other toughest things to defend in the NBA beyond personnel, obviously?
Yeah. Well, and everybody's terminology is different, and just a couple actions that I think not just us, but everybody in the NBA talks about going in on a daily basis. 82 regular season games a year, you're game planning 82 times, but you're pretty much always going to talk about some form of the delay action or the 5-out, the open action. And most teams are going to run some variation of a pin down DHO. And a lot of times that's a problem for NBA defenses, because the pin down is occurring as there's action on the other side. Therefore, your low man might not be in a position to be a helper on a roller. And then the pin down guy might have been a Kevin Durant or one of these knockdown shooters that you're having to get into a single side tag situation. And then you look at a lot of teams in the NBA, they have 4 shooters out there now, 4 shooters and a roller. And then you put the ball in a really dynamic ball handler's hands, like we see in the West on a nightly basis. You look at some of the guys that we faced in the playoffs, whether it be Anthony Edwards, whether it be Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Jimmy Butler, LeBron James. I mean, you can just kind of go on the list of these dynamic ball handlers who are so smart, and they're able to kind of pick you apart if you're not firm in your communication, firm in accepting your commands, and then detailed in how you're going to sit down and guard these dynamic players and be in help situations for these rollers. They can pick you apart. So the pin down DHO, and then the ghost cut, and I say ghost cut out of the corner as a high pick and roll, can also be a side pick and roll, step up pick and roll, but that opposite corner man cutting as you're tagging, as the guy's tagging it, a hard roller. If you're more up at the level of the screen, that's a hard one to guard, because then you're probably getting into rotation, because that next man is going to have to drop, and then that guy guarding the ball is going to have to rotate over to the next shooter, and you're basically in scramble mode at that point. But I think something that we got very good with as a team is being able to scramble out of those situations and trying to contain late into the shot clock, and understanding that, hey, we're probably going to have to defend 20 seconds out of the 24, which takes a lot for players to really be focused for that extended period of time during a possession.
Man, not fun to be a defensive coordinator in the NBA.
So most nights it's not. A lot of talent on the offensive end.
Well, you could play the perfect defense and it doesn't matter sometimes. That's the thing that obviously we respect so much about the different players in the NBA, just incredible talent. What percentage, or like you've been around obviously a lot of different defenses throughout your NBA career. So give us a perspective, and there's probably not a specific answer, but like
Yeah.
the percentage of the defensive system that would be in place regardless of your personnel. Is there a base that would be there regardless of personnel, and then you adapt it for your personnel?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's once again an evolving answer. And I'd say you probably have anywhere between 60 and 80% of your base defense, and then you're probably adjusting, obviously, the rest of that, whether it be 20 to 40%. You're probably adjusting your levels of your pick and roll coverage. Hey, do you have a big that's a rim protecting big that you want to keep in a drop kind of hovering around the restricted, trying to force teams into a contested two? And then with that, though, do you have a guy that you can put on the ball who's a bigger guard or a bigger wing that's tougher to screen, that's physical, that can fight through a screen to get a great rear view contest for that big who's at the rim? So you're kind of looking at going to be involved in most of those pick and roll actions, I think, because we're seeing there's some nights you're going to see over 115 pick and rolls a game in the NBA. So everything kind of comes back to that. That's the heart of your defense. And so you're going to adjust those levels, and then based on your personnel, I believe. But then you're also going to adjust. Are you going to be a switching team off the ball, or are you going to be a team that, hey, stays more, you don't want to call it vanilla, but more just solid? Hey, we're up, we're in protection, we're fighting through screens, we're either gapping or we're chasing. We can top lock as well, but we're not going to be a team that's going to get cut up just by kind of point switching. And I think it also in the NBA, you need to have a little bit of both, be able to adjust to certain teams where, hey, we are just going to try to switch everything here, switch on and off the ball. But you also need to have your base defense too. So you're going to adjust your scheme a little bit based on your personnel, but then you're also going to adjust your scheme and your base defense based on your opponent on a nightly basis. But the tough thing for that is practice time. You want, like any coach, you want practice time throughout the season to be able to implement these new ideas and these new things. And unfortunate for us, there isn't a lot of practice time because you're playing 4 games in 5 nights. Yeah. So if you can teach it off film, more power to you.
That's great. I mean, Coach, I already know people are going to be listening to this multiple times to get some of the insights. This is awesome. Thank you. And what kind of you stimulated me to think about it and to say a bad defender. That's so unfair in the NBA relative to being one of the best players in the world. There's less effective defenders. And I know I get this question a lot from the high school level. So I've got a player that's not as effective defensively. How can I individually help them first be better defensively?
Yeah. One, I mean, I'd say the challenging of that individual first is important. That's the first thing we should look at. Hey, can we challenge them to do things harder, do things smarter, and do things with more intention? That would be, I guess, my first piece of advice in that sense. And if they're doing everything to the best of their abilities, if they're able to understand the game plan, but maybe they're just not able to implement it. Maybe they just don't have that lateral foot speed, or they have an injury they're dealing with, something that then we need to go back to the drawing board. And then I think that's where coaching and us trying to help these guys comes into play. You might be in a situation where in the NBA, and I'm sure a lot of people can see it, but if somebody's listening to this and they haven't noticed it, if you watch a game and you see a quote unquote bad defender, or somebody who's known to not be a bad defender, and they're going against a really, really potent offensive player, dynamic offensive player, there are possessions where you will see that player get called up into a ball screen 6 times. And that's because maybe they're just showing to try to stay off that offensive player. Maybe they're blitzing to try to stay off that offensive player. But whatever they're doing, they're trying not to switch onto that player. But the NBA it's an unforgiving league where they will just continue to pick on you until they get the matchup they want. And we face it, every team faces it. So you try to find ways, and I mentioned it, hey, maybe you're going to show, and I know I'm talking a lot about ball screens, but we just see so many of them. Maybe you're going to show to try to keep maintain the matchup. Maybe you're just going to trap and get trapped with that poor defender to get the ball out of the dynamic offensive player's hands. Then you get into rotations, make the ball find somebody. The NBA, a lot of guys can beat you, but maybe you're going to pick your poison, and you don't want this certain all NBA caliber player to be the guy to beat you. You want it to be somebody that's maybe spotted up in the corner. So you try to search for those answers too. But once again, probably not a right answer, right blanket answer. It's going to be whatever the right answer is for your individual team, your individual player. And that could also be looking at zone defense. Maybe you're just going to try to play 2-3 or play 3-2 and hide this player at the bottom and have him or her be a guy or girl that just runs the dynamic offensive player off the line. And then you're in the scramble situation if they're closing out to the corner. Those types of things are things to think about.
So many things to think about. And your dad was famously known a little bit for some of the early matchup zone type stuff. Mm-hmm. And you've been around it along, and now zone is, again, definitely in vogue in terms of some of the solution-based things. Are there any insights into running zone versus modern offenses?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't think a zone can be used exclusively. The team that probably uses it the most, and they do an unbelievable job, is Miami. And you can tell they work on it, and they spend a lot of time on it. So like anything, you have to pick what you want to spend time on. And through a season might not be enough time to really work on all the intricacies of the zone. When the ball goes to the high post, when the ball goes from top of the key to the wing, are you bumping? Are you not bumping? How are you handling pick and rolls? So when we talk about, I guess, some of the details to it all, I've always liked to think that you should try to keep things as simple as possible within a zone for players if you're not spending 50% of your defensive time on that zone. So
the norm, is it, in the NBA? I would assume that's the norm.
Yeah. I think I would say that's pretty much the norm, with the exception of maybe one or two teams that might spend a little more time than that. But everybody's going to try to get that ball to the middle of the floor. They're trying to create an overload situation. Are you then you have to make the decision. Are you going with cutters? Are you a group that are you bumping on the wings? Are you more of a kind of, I guess, drop back and protect zone, or are you trying to extend the zone similar to a team like Miami and force turnovers? I think you can pick things up from any level. I've watched a number of things from colleges and even high schools of the way they handle. Granted, the zone rules are different. The three seconds in the paint rules are different. We have defensive 3 second, which is 3 seconds, which can be an issue. But they're always going to still try to exploit that bad defender, quote unquote bad defender. They'll try to find him in the zone as well.
It's amazing. I mean, we all watched the World Cup, and you saw how many times different players were hunted in the World Cup, even with the FIBA rules. So it's not exclusive to the NBA rules. And
no, it's not. And it's interesting too. A lot of times you see narratives of this player that might be you think is a great defensive player, yet he's being called up every time in pick and rolls. Or a player that you might think is not a great defensive player, and he's not getting called up at all because he's 6'10", and teams don't want to have to deal with that length when the ball handler might be a 6'1" guy. So there's a lot of different things to take into consideration, I guess, on the offensive end too, when trying to attack matchups defensively.
So I'm curious, and maybe more offense, but I'm curious, do certain players on a roster, do they have certain matchups that they really like to hunt based on, again, some type of history or some type of experience with certain players?
Oh yeah. And
so some of it's player led.
It is big time. And it's contrary to what some people might believe. Probably not your listeners here, Chris, as I know this is a educated audience on basketball immersion. But in the NBA, we don't just roll the balls out there and tip it off at 7 or 7:30 p.m. There's a lot of prep time that goes into that. And that's not just on the coaching end. That's on the player end too. And something that's not talked about enough is the detail that a lot of these guys watch film, watch upcoming matchups, how they speak to the video coordinators on, hey, I'd like to see so-and-so his last 100 pick and rolls that he's guarded. Things like that. They get that film on their iPad, then on the plane to watch, or they're watching it before the game, and they're talking to their teammate, talking to locker mate, the guy that's next to him, on how they're going to exploit that matchup. And I think that's something that this team has been so good with for so many years. And a lot of that goes to Coach Malone for giving these guys that confidence and to allow them to do that and make those decisions on the fly. But this isn't football where we can call a play every single time or call a defensive scheme every single stoppage, every single time a play is about to be ran. This is a free-flowing game. And so a lot of it is on the players. And when you got guys who care and guys who are intelligent with how they study the game, you're gonna have a much better chance of coming out on top at the end. And we had that this year. But like you kind of mentioned at the beginning of the question, a lot of that is player led because it's just in the free flow of the game.
That's great. And I mean, you've referred to this many times, and I think this has always been part of good coaches, but I think even more so in the modern game, this concept of too many coaches want defense to be just black and white. That doesn't exist anymore, really, does it?
No. I mean, the game, you'd love it to be black and white, where there's always a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it. And like, hey, we said we were going to chase this guy every single time down the floor because he's a knockdown shooter. You didn't chase him this time, and that's why he got an open three. Well, you probably did. Maybe you didn't chase him because the screen was set, near the hash towards half court. Then you got to be a basketball player and play in the gray area and understand that the location of the screen, and then also the personnel is going to determine your route. That's something we like to say a lot when we talk about the deeper the screen, the more likely you're going to have to chase, even if the guy is considered a gap player. But if it's higher up the floor, even if the guy's considered a chase player, hey, you might gap to be able to get back in front because he's not in the scoring area yet. So the game is played in a gray area. And that's where confidence both ways has to come into play, I believe. Confidence from the players in us that we're going to not ask them to do something that we know is impossible, but then also the confidence that we're not just going to be on them just because they didn't defend it the way we said they were going to defend it in the game plan. We have to tell them they're to be basketball players as well, and then we have the confidence in them to make those decisions on the court too. And then we can yell at them after if it doesn't work.
Of course, we always got that as a fallback.
Right.
Yeah. And you've got veteran players, obviously, different guys that they're going to be able to solve problems a little bit more. But how do you create that environment for some of your new players or newcomers or rookies in the league to allow them to be able to solve problems and give them that permission and freedom to be able to do that? Is there a certain environment that you need to create to be able to allow them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll use the term, you can have your you have to earn your permit first to be able to kind of make those gray area decisions. Then you earn your license. And like Contavious Caldwell-Pope, who's even before last year was a championship level player, he earned the license to be able to make some of those calls on the fly. A guy like Christian Brown, as the season went on, he was able to earn his permit quick and then earn his license pretty quick too. Because one, he showed the level of commitment to his preparation, but also he showed the ability to be able to do those things and think through those situations on the fly. So it's about giving players the room to grow and to make those decisions, but also giving them the proper corrections as well after the fact when those decisions on the fly might not be ones that we feel are best for our team moving forward. And then you kind of see as time goes on, they grow into themselves and they find their voice a little bit on, hey, this works for me, or I don't feel comfortable doing this. And to me, and everybody's different, but that's the signs of a coach, not just a good coach, but a coach who's willing to be a good partner with your players too, is do you take those things into consideration? And I do think that's important, hearing what the players feel is most comfortable. They're most comfortable doing, whether it be coverage wise, whether it be matchup wise, or just defending a certain set. Hey, like we had plenty of situations in walkthroughs where we go into a walkthrough, coaches, we felt the best way to defend something was this way. And I'm sure if you talk to 29 other NBA teams, they would tell you they would handle it in a very similar way on a game day. A player might bring something up and say, and it might be, hey, I played with this guy. We gotta send him left, or we gotta defend the cross screen this way. You take those things into consideration, and ultimately at the end of the day, they're the ones on the floor having to execute that game plan. So you try to allow them to do that and give them a voice too, which is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Great nuggets into solution-based defense there throughout. And I'm curious, like peel switching is something I'm sure you dove into it. You obviously know it. You maybe to some extent teach it, but
Hmm.
don't see it as much in the NBA as probably might thought it might have been when we all studied it a few
Yeah.
years back.
Oh yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because that was something I remember my dad always used to like to talk about going into a training camp with the team, and he called it a go when you run a go, and he always taught it, and like you said, you don't see it a whole lot in the NBA, a little bit, and some guys are smart enough. There's a few specific players that come to mind throughout the league that really just do it naturally on their own when they're beat. But my dad always liked to teach it in a way with those Minnesota teams and those Detroit teams that if you were beat, it wasn't part of your set based defense, I guess. But if you were beat, it was something you communicated, and that's to me that goes into the same, I guess, the same category of whether it be a late switch or a veer in a pick and roll. Hey, is the bigs, is he engaged? Is the ball handler, is he getting downhill with his shoulders, full thrust to the basket, where you have to get into a late switch or a veer situation? That's the way I guess I've always kind of looked at a peel switch, but I do think it's something that we'll continue to see more of because there has been success with it overseas. I know there's been a number of college teams that have had success with it, and it's still hiding in there. I just don't think it's a full base defense that everybody's gone to yet.
When you refer to it, I mean, there's just more space to cover in the NBA with that, with the gravity and
Yeah,
the different
yeah,
types of court. And the college game, it tends to be probably a little more efficient because there's less space.
yep,
So you don't have to
yeah.
cover it as far, but it is fascinating. That's great that your dad was using that concept way back when. And it just shows you how the game keeps kind of circling back to different
Mhm.
ideas and different
It
things. And
does.
another thing is triple switches and that type of scrams and different things
Yep.
like that. We're seeing that a little bit more, but I don't think we saw the depth of switching that we probably thought was going to happen either, did we?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I do look at something like that, like in through the playoffs, we did a lot of that. We kind of
Did
went
yeah.
to a situation where Aaron Gordon was our backup five, so we were able to do more switching. With that, you obviously want to try to get your bigger player, as simple as it sounds, hey, big in, little out. And you search for opportunities to scram that smaller player to the perimeter so you can be in a situation to rebound the basketball. And then we just haven't, like you said, we haven't seen as much as we probably thought we were going to see as it's become more prevalent over these last couple of years. I do think if we look hard at it, there are certain actions in the NBA, like that pin DHO. If you're within a switching group, so when I say switching group, I think most teams will identify, hey, these six guys are part of their switching group for the whole year. So what I mean by that is if they're involved in any actions in terms of pick and rolls, DHOs, they're able to switch it. If you're in a pin DHO with out of the open action, out of the delay action, you'll see a triple switch a lot of times naturally just based off of the way the guy who was guarding the screener, the way he's going to switch onto the ball, and then the guy who was the pin down guy, he's already below the screener. Therefore, he has to take the roll to the basket, and then other guy just kind of peels off to the 3-point line. So I think there's some actions that you naturally see it. You'll
Kind of
see
like
it
a zone concept of bumping almost, isn't it?
pretty much, yeah,
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 that's
and
cool.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
yeah, it is, and it takes time to work on, and I think that you find in the NBA, especially with timing wise, you learn more. You can learn that you can teach more within player development too, and 3-man actions are really prevalent in the NBA. I think that's something that when teams know you're going to switch on or off the ball, they're going to try to. Golden State does a great job of putting you in 3-man actions, trying to force a miscommunication within that. So it's good to work on those, whether it be just in player development or just in your pre-practice breakdown when you don't have the whole team out there. And there you can kind of work on your triple switches as well, because it is something that I think we're going to continue to see more and more of, though.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's so fun watching the NBA and watching coaches and everyone try and figure it out because
We're all trying to do the same thing.
the magnitude of challenges is there for sure. And I've talked about this on the podcast before about offense, about, yeah, I think the example went back to OKC with Russell Westbrook, how unique he was as an offensive player. And you take him off the floor and you almost have to run a different offense. Is the same thing apply a little bit defensively with certain players? If they're off the floor, you're doing something completely almost different because that player's not on the floor.
Oh, definitely. And I think that a great example you talk about Oklahoma City that's a great example of Russ during that time. They were very different. The Clippers, they were always a team that their bench had a full different package of plays than that starting unit. A lot of times that was when Lou Williams came in the game, those guys, but it was very different. Therefore, I think you've had to kind of evolve as a defense of how you're going to defend that type of, I guess, that type of mindset offensively. And then the game's kind of evolved where you don't see a lot of, I guess, quote unquote, big backup centers. More times than not, you're going to see more of a small ball five as a backup. And that was more specific to the playoffs, I think, too. Therefore, your defensive package for your first unit could be completely different than your defensive package for your second unit, where your second unit, maybe they're switching 1 through 5 in terms of ball screens. And then your first unit, maybe you don't have that capability. So it's different. But I think that can work to your favor as well, where it's a different look for the other team's offense too, or the other team's preparation. If you're able to defend in a couple different ways. And once again, to me, that should just go back to, do you have that personnel to be able to do that? And if you have the personnel though, that you're able just to defend one way, then I think it's important you don't try to reinvent the wheel and don't try to force a square peg into a round hole just because you want to have a diverse defense. You got to play to your players' strengths.
Ryan, this has been unbelievable. Your passion and your knowledge shines through, and I've just loved talking to you so much and hearing your insights on the game. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Chris.